Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of I Am Legion for Dying Light 1 and 2. My name is Jason, the creator of the mod, and I'm here with another video tonight to show off a new released application that just came out that I'm launching on the Nexus for your guys' use. So that is the previous video that you guys saw, which is the mod manager or the mod config. So I've been working, trying to make a new system for you guys to be able to modify the mod config that's built into the mod, as that is like one of the best ways to modify the game and get all those very finite settings tuned in just how you enjoy playing the game. I've got 5 different difficulties at this point for the mod, but that doesn't always mean it covers everything that you want from the mod. So I wanted to release this new application that would allow you to be able to go through these mod configs a lot faster. So let me go ahead and show off the functionality. I'll give you a couple of tips and tricks on how to get started and how to make your own configurations. So the new application can actually update your configurations as we go. So in the future, as I'm putting out updates, no worries, all the things that you've set inside the code, inside the mod manager or mod config will stick. So it'll automatically update that config, and I'll show you how to apply that information into the game. So let's go ahead and get started. First and foremost, this release of the application is going to come with 2 things. So it's going to come with the application, and then it's going to come with the configs folder. Inside that configs folder, you'll have an archive, a backup, and then an I Am Legion Reborn folder. So inside the folder is all 4 difficulties that are getting loaded in. Vanilla plus content uses the same config as casual survivor, so no need for an extra config there. So let's go ahead and launch this. So if you've just downloaded the application and you're launching it for the first time, the first thing that's going to come up is it's going to ask you for a location for the game. So the first thing that'll come up as soon as you launch is it'll try to load, and then it's going to ask you to actually select the folder for the Dying Light 2 game. So the first thing you need to do, here's a tip and trick that I put for my install guide, but this one is always the easiest. Head over to Steam or Epic, right click, go to manage, and hit browse local files. As soon as you do that, it'll open up the main root directory of Dying Light 2, and this is where I Am Legion Reborn has to be installed already. So don't even go down this path unless you've already updated and installed the latest version of I Am Legion. You will need the absolute latest version. As of this video, it should be 1.4 i2. 1.5 is coming. I wanted to get this application out so that you guys could do early testing, so any of those feedback loops can go into the 1.5 update that's coming shortly. So let's go ahead and copy this path. So this is the path we want. You can browse for it, but to save time, you can also just paste that in. So once we have this selected, all we have to do is hit select folder. And the mod config can actually read that pack file that's properly installed inside your game. So from this point on, you will no longer need to open up your pack file unless you are trying to actually modify some of the specific features in the mod itself. But I'm hoping this will allow you to go in here and make a lot of these changes without ever having to open that pack file again. So a couple of things that are going to show up immediately is that you're going to get the Dying Light 2 version. Sometimes there's a timing issue where you will end up getting a couple of conflicting reports down here. Some things may double up. I'm still working on some bugs on the back end, but really the most critical part is I have a lot of fallback and fail safes inside this application to make sure that your data is being saved. So for example, once you've actually opened this once, that's all you need to do. So the next time you launch, it's going to go ahead and remember that location. It's going to remember things like the size of the window that you set. It's going to remember a couple of the things that you set in the application. So you shouldn't have to do it after that point. So it's going to go ahead and pull it up, and each time, first thing it's going to do is tell you the version of Dying Light 2. It'll also alert you if this version changed from the last time you launched this mod manager. I'm going to update this in the future to work with my launcher, so it actually will be able to let you know hey, this is the latest version of the mod, this is the latest version of the game, it looks like you're outdated, you need to go to the Nexus. The main reason for that, I'll quickly explain. It's because I'm still working on a transition point to where all of this will go into an automatic updater. Currently, it does support me by using the Nexus mods. As soon as I move to the automatic updater, I will lose some of my like actual perk status that I'm getting on the Nexus. I'm actually getting points, and I'm actually continuing to grow the mod by having downloads and endorsements. So as soon as I move away from the Nexus more, some of that endorsement system is going to go away. And so I do appreciate your guys' efforts of actually downloading the mod and endorsing. That's a big effort here to try to make, Techland say like, hey, by the way, this mod is still progressing. People are still enjoying it. So as soon as we shift away, those numbers are going to have to go somewhere else. So thank you for understanding, and just bear with me while I still figure out the automatic updater for the game. So next it's going to show you the actual directory and that you've loaded in. So I've created a versioning system for the mod config. So as I put out new versions of not the mod, but the mod config, it will actually let you know here that the version has updated. What does that mean? So basically, if your mod config has updated, if the version of that mod config is updated, that's where code on the back end is actually going to identify that all the configurations that you've made, and I'll explain here in a second what configurations are, all the configurations that you made will automatically be identified from their version, and then they'll be moved to a backup folder. You'll get a good backup that's already done inside this configs backup folder while it begins the update process, and then it'll go ahead and update your config and then load it back into the list so you can get to it. So before I dive too much into this, let me explain kind of the perks and the whole point of this application. So the big thing here is I wanted you to be able to immediately parse and load in the data from my mod config. So everything that you see here is being generated by the mod config itself. So in the future, as I'm doing updates to the mod config, you don't have to do anything other than load the MTH file or set the directory. So for those of you who want to get more in depth and actually extract the MTH file still and load in your own configs, you can do that as well. But I'm hoping a lot of this will kind of alleviate the need to do that, but I'll leave that up to you. I've given you 3 options here at the top. You can set the directory, you can load a custom MTH. So if you have one that you have saved to your desktop or anywhere on your computer, you can immediately load that in. All prior versions of that config will no longer work. I had to completely reamp the mod config to get it to work with this formatting. So just please be aware that all of your older configs before this point, I apologize, those settings will need to be converted into this system. So once you've converted into this system, this is the reason I designed the application, it will try to keep all of your data relevant and updated from then on out. But sadly, we're going to have to lose that data one more time. Hopefully you've still got it saved somewhere, or you can grab it from somewhere and just input this information using the new interface. Should be pretty quick. Next, below that, we have the config system. So underneath this first drop down, we have Casual Survivor, Survivor, Ultimate Survivor, and Insanity. What these are configurations. So there's data inside the actual config file, and then there's actual data that I'm storing based on the interface. So these are configurations that are actually being generated based on the application, and I'll show you their usefulness here in a second. It's pretty fun. Next, you're going to have your local configs. This is where you can make as many configurations, as many quick testing configurations as you want, as many configs for you to share, whatever you want to do with this application. This is where it comes into play. So you can actually very quickly make your own configurations and then load those back into the system and then quickly save and swap between configurations. It actually is a lot of fun to just quickly test things out and try different things by doing this setting. It has drastically sped up my process of testing. So underneath this, you've got the store current config. We don't currently have any settings yet, so we'll come back to that. And then we have the share configs button, which what that does is it just opens this configs folder. And when you create those local configs, they'll end up in this top folder here. So if you ever want to just jump on the Discord channel and share, what I've done is created a link here. So if you want to actually just click the link, it will take you to the Discord page. That will then take you to the Discord app, and then you can just drop your config. If you are curious what that looks like, inside the I Am Legion mod. At the very bottom here, I have the config share. Please feel free to share whatever configurations you make with this new format. You can create a new post. You can upload that JSON file that it's going to generate for you, add it to a zip, just upload the file, add a quick summary of what it does, and I'm super excited to test it out. Underneath that, you have the actual save MTH config. So this is only useful if you have loaded an MTH config. If you haven't loaded one, then it's not going to do anything. It's going to let you know that no file was set. If you have the game loaded, it's going to try to inject into the original file. So anytime that you need to go and set this up, it's going to let you know. So I apologize, I accidentally hit this load. I meant to hit save. But all you have to do is you then just hit save mod pack, and it's going to immediately inject into the game code. So setting that directory is really all you need to do. Now let's dive into like what this thing actually does. So once everything's pulled in, before we dive in, I apologize, one more thing. Before we dive in, I do have, if you're curious about mod support, please make sure to check out my Patreon. My Patreon is driving a lot of this forward momentum and development. Thank you so much to my Patreon supporters for everything you do to continue to support the community and myself through this process. And thank you again to the Discord community for continuing to jump in and build a community around this mod. I really appreciate that. And here you also have the links. So here you have quick links to everything. So if you want to get to the Nexus, if you want to get to the Discord, the YouTube channel, GitHub channel, it's all right here. You can get to these different things very quickly. Okay, let's dive in a little bit. So like I said, all of this data is being parsed at load. So whenever you load a new file, let me show you an example here. If we actually go over here and I'll load the I Am Legion settings extracted configuration, when I do that, it's going to completely wipe the interface here because it's basically recreating this entire interface and starting from scratch. So what I've done is I've now injected all of that data from that configuration, and so I'm no longer saving into the game directory. If I want to fix that, all I have to do is go back, and I'm just going to set my directory again, just for the sake of simplicity here. We'll go ahead and load this back in. You will not get a game version if you're loading the configuration. You will get a game version when setting the directory. So just make sure that you do have that directory set. That is the best way to utilize this tool at this time, is by not having to do any work of actually extracting any files. Once it's done that, it's basically pulling in all the data that you were having to go in and manually set in those sections that I created. I've tried to create a clean interface to allow you to very quickly go in and make these settings inside the mod config, so that you're not having to actually worry about things like syntax and little minor things like what can I load in. All of that I've tried to bring into the interface to make this as straightforward as possible so that you understand what you can do with those settings. What I do not currently have are the thresholds of max and min, mainly because I haven't discovered all the max and min values for this. What would be helpful is, as you're using this application, if you discover that you had a setting in here, that you tried to do a setting and it causes it to crash, then please just let me know, and I'll actually try to add a max value to those different ones inside the interface for the next update. What I've tried to go through and set up for some of these input boxes is that if you mess up the formatting, I've tried to make it to where if you go here and you press the up, it will kind of recorrect any of your settings. So say you came in and you said like 50. It doesn't hurt to just confirm that it's not a float value, and please pay attention to some of these default values. That was the biggest thing that was kind of hurting people, is that they would go in there and they would press like 5 and then they would hit save and the game would crash. And the reason for that is because it's missing the syntax. So I haven't been able to fully eliminate that. Some of the values here, it will detect when you've deselected and it'll convert it back into a float. I haven't done that on everything because there is kind of a split between the things. things. So I'm still learning what I can do. Also with doing keyboard input, most of the time the keyboard input makes it to where it kind of overrides most of the actions here. So I'm still learning what I can do with the application, and I'll continue to get in updates based on your feedback. So especially for this first leg of it, please just let me know your feedback and your experience, and I'll continue to refine as we go. So for example, if we wanted to go in here and set camera FOV, if we wanted to actually remove some of the run FOV, if we wanted to find things like X-ray effects and parkour with the zip line, all of that can be found. Some of the big things to look out for specifically are the difficulty settings, like the damages to the player, fall damages, things like single player damages. I've gone through and I've rebalanced every mod or every version and every difficulty to have slightly different settings for single player, 2 player, 3 player, 4 player. Hopefully you guys enjoy those settings. Please let me know your feedback based on what you're experiencing. But the idea here is that as you guys are playing and working through these different settings, you can now use the configuration system to store those settings. So for example, if we want to go over to our scream spawns, so this is the one of the more commonly asked about sections, so let me go ahead and explain. These 3 are based on when there are alerts or screams from the enemies. So the first one you have is the howler scream. The howler no longer immediately starts a chase in the mod, and so because of that, they're actually starting an alert chase is kind of what I'm calling it now. They're alerting the world to your presence, and that's bringing the map towards you. Then you have the second tier, which is the volatiles and their screams. The volatile pack leaders, the ones with the icons above their heads, they can start actual hunts or chases, but there are other volatiles that will not be marked that are more stealthy, and I actually like having a mix of those because then you end up with ones that you need to keep an eye out for that are not pack leaders, that are hugging the tree line, that are crawling across the buildings, that do not have icons that you need to be paying attention for. They're able to start a mini chase, which is this code, which is basically calling in more reinforcements to your location based on what they call out. So they're going to scream, and that's going to actually go and spawn some of these characters, or not characters, I apologize, some of these enemies. The idea here is that I have this set on a min and a max. So for example, every time they scream, you have a 0 and 1 here. So maybe one time they'll scream and none of these will get spawned. The next time, maybe all of them will get spawned. So it's completely random each time, makes the world a little bit more dangerous and a little bit more chaotic across the board. So that's the volatiles. I apologize, I thought I had the volatiles selected there. Next is the actual chase initial spawn. What this is that as soon as a spawn actually starts, these are the enemies that immediately spawn into the world, that are immediately alarmed, that will start to hyper focus the player and chase them. So that's where this code up here at the top that says focus on the player, that's set to true. So as soon as a chase starts, you have the chance for demolishers, spitters, goons, volatiles, banshees, all of those to start chasing you as well while you're trying to get away from the ones that are brought in through the normal chase system, which can also be found in here. So you can also set things for the normal chase system that's part of the vanilla game. So there's a bunch of settings in here, but let me get back to the configuration. So let's say for starting the initial chase, you want to go in here and change some of the settings that I have loaded. You're playing the survivor difficulty. You can actually go in here and load those, and I apologize, I actually just spotted something when I tried to load that in. Interesting. So I will make sure to fix that before I release this. I'm not sure why that failed, but if we just relaunch the application, I'm sure it'll get it. There's going to be a couple of little minor things here and there just at the start. Please bear with me as I'm continuing to get this field tested. If you experience any issues, I promise you, probably just most of the time you just restart the application, because it is storing everything inside the application. It should be able to just get you very quickly back to where you were. So let me explain the actual configuration settings. So with a configuration, we now have Survivor loaded in. Say we want to see what the settings are on the different difficulties. Well, you can actually go in here to the different ones and you can select them and hit load. And when you do that, it's going to go through and it's going to show you down here at the bottom all the different changes that each difficulty is making to the actual mod config. So say, for example, if we wanted to see what Ultimate did versus Survivor, we can actually very quickly load that in and see what that does. And I think for the most part, especially for these top fields, most of those stay about the same. I think it's the ones down here towards the bottom that, yeah, have different settings. But essentially, it's just going to load in those values, and none of this is being saved. It's just being loaded into the interface. So if we actually wanted to save that information, all you have to do is hit Save Mode Pack. So if you're playing on, for example, if you're playing on Ultimate, and you want to set the difficulty back to casual for whatever reason, this will allow you to keep all of the data that's actually added by Ultimate for the difficulty, for the sensing, all the other code that's being driven for Ultimate could be inside the mod, while you can actually drive the mod config all the way back to casual if you wanted to. That might be useful for something like Insanity, where you really like the spawn, how the spawns work for Insanity, but you also want to dial back some of the difficulty. You could go in here and set this back to Survivor while having Insanity installed, and you get a blend and a mix of different things. I can't promise that that's always going to result in how you want it to, because it's so many different working pieces in the mod. More coming shortly on this modular approach to building out the mod. But if you wanted to go in here and create your own config, back to driving forward this own config, say we don't want goons, we're playing on Survivor, the initial spawn starts, let's change this to something like virals. I've set this up to where when you click these drop downs, I'm basically pulling in every available enemy into this list. So you can now see all the different AI that you can spawn by opening up this list. You can also start to type a name and it'll let you know, it'll actually filter down. So say, for example, we want virals to spawn. We want 3 virals to spawn with a 1 always spawning. So every time a chase starts, at least 1 viral will always spawn. So then we're going to go in here and create a new config. So we're going to click on this store current config and we'll call this viral chase. Hit OK. It'll let us know down at the bottom that we have a new config. And then down under our local config, you can see that we now have a new config called local chase. At any time, you can load this into the interface, and at any time, you can load the original I Am Legion Reborn config back into the interface. So if you now want to switch between these 2 configurations, you can very quickly switch between them. It's going to let you know what's changing down at the bottom. How to read this is first look at the first part. It's letting you know it's in scream spawns, so that's here. Next is going to be chase initial spawn, so you know it's under this tab. And then spawn type 1 is going to be this section, and then it's going to be the box that it resides in. So that's 0 is going to be this first one right here. So super excited to get your guys' feedback on this. When I finally got the code all working to where it was hot swapping the values out, I was like, yes. Absolutely. So if you wanted to share this config, once you've created this config, here is your config file, which is a JSON file. You can upload this to the Discord, and now everybody can experience virals loading in at this time. For example, if you wanted to give me feedback, if you went through and you were adjusting a bunch of things and you were fine-tuning like settings to where you felt like it was way more fair for Survivor, send me the config, send me that file so I can load it in and do my own testing, so I can quickly see how you prefer to play. And in the future, we currently have this idea of 5 different difficulties, but now with the config system, you can have as many as 30, 40, 100 different configs on your system at any time and actually switch between them. You probably want a really good naming system, but that'll come in later. So this is how you can now navigate the different spawn systems. I'll try to keep this video a little bit shorter. There are so many different sections here. What I've tried to do is for every single section, I've tried to give you a shortcut that leads to the mod config manual. So as soon as you go to the different tabs, if you see a section that you want to find out a little bit more about, you can click on this little short link and it will load right to the page for the mod manual. I will admit, when I was redoing some of this and when I was going in there, I do need to go back and redo some of the manual. It is very simple. It was very fast pass at the time. And now that I have more of this blocked out, and the reason I did a lot of that is because it's now been completely restructured. So a lot of it's going to have to be rewritten or just completely redone. Some of those sections are no longer relevant from the updates. So because of that, it's a growing process. But the idea here is that you'll be able to go in here and make the modifications, hopefully, that you've always wanted to make to the game and really dial these in, all the way from lock picking to loot tables. Now, let me tell you about a new update that I just added. So part of this release, I've just added a new feature. So under this feature, and in the future, when you get any new features for the mod config, what's going to happen is, say you get an update to the mod, and I let you know that we've now upgraded to 1.6 on the mod config. So mod config is now 1.6. The next time I push out an update, you'll be able to load this application back in, and it should immediately detect the changes on these official configurations. If it detects a change on the official configuration, what you can do is you can say, I apologize. What it will do is it'll actually immediately create a backup of that file, and then it'll actually automatically, you don't have to say anything. I was thinking of something different. When you open this up, it's going to automatically update that config, and it's going to load in that new section automatically. So you should get that new section that when it opens up, when you've installed the new update and you open up this mod config, you should immediately see that new section in here, but then you should also now have that new config that loads in as well. And if you want to apply that to your actual configs, all you have to do is make sure that when these configs are automatically updated, just make sure to load them in and make sure that they're actually changing all the values that you want. Please let me know your feedback and let me know if you're having any weirdness with any of that. I've done a lot of testing. I've stopped the process of releasing this to do a ton of testing and a lot of use cases for breaking it before releasing this out. If you run into any, please let me know. You can also send me your JSON file if you run into an issue with the update. It will have backups, and so you should be able to get me the backup, and we can look at it together to figure out how the update code needs to be refined to make sure if you're starting to get like a syntax error or whatever it may be. So in this case, and back to what I've recently added the ability to adjust specific settings for the loot options for each thing. So for example, now for each one of the difficulties, if you're playing on Ultimate Survivor or if you're playing on Insanity, you will get more loot randomly based on a min and a max value. You have the potential of getting more loot when you're playing on the higher difficulties. So as you're running around the world, specifically with things like alcohol, electronic parts, weights, pigments, etc., you have the chance of getting more of these. I've also added the plants as well. So there's a new section where you can adjust the amount of the values for the amount of plants that you get as well. So if you like getting the different honeys, you can get more honeys. If you also want to adjust the valuables, I've added a new value here, which is this valuable min max as well. So there's also a range. It's not broken apart by specific valuables because there's so many of them. Basically what I did was set that as a global. So once again, you can go in here and say that you want to increase the global, and to break down kind of the difference here is that you have these drop modifiers. These drop modifiers down here are more based on the amount of them that you can get back in a range, while these were the conversion of the single point. So there's the single pickups that were always coded to only give you one ever. So these top ones, these specific ones, the plant ones, and then this one up here at the top, those were coded where it was always going to be one, and now I'm giving you a range. The reason I added it like that is some people were reporting that they wanted to always get 3 of an item, always get 4 of an item, whatever whatever that is. Well, if you want to get exactly that amount, or you want to get a range of that amount, you can now set these values and it should give you that amount. I will mention that I've had a couple of different containers that even after setting these, you still only get one. I'm still looking into it, but for the most part, these should be a ton of different boosters to get loot. I'm not really all about cheating using this mod. That's not what the point of this is. The point is to try to incentivize and also balance all the new difficulties with the play style. So like things like insanity and ultimate, you're going to have to move a lot faster in the open world because the world is constantly coming down at you. So because of that, you don't have as much time to stop and loot. And so the hope here is that in the chances that you do get to loot, it's more rewarding than it normally is. All right, guys, I think that's most of the things in here that I wanted to cover. I think, it's just going to take time for everybody to jump in here and just kind of look through this config, mod config. Let me know your thoughts. Make a few configurations. Try to load them in. And just as a reminder, once you set up your mod config how you want, and one thing to add here is that say you continue to add on to this config and you want to update it, all you have to do is hit store current config again, and if you want to update the one that's currently selected, you hit yes, and if you want to create a new one, you hit no, and you can make another one. You can make as many as you want. It's not a problem, and you can continue to update the older ones as well. So say, for example, also if the mod config has updated and a new version has come out, you can load in the values, go set all the new values that have been added with the new sections, and then just hit store current config, and it'll immediately update your configuration with all the new content. Once we have everything set how we want, we can go and hit save mode pack. And when we do that, it's going to give you a good summary of all the things that you're pushing out to the actual game. So you can go through here and just check your list here, make sure nothing's weird. Probably the biggest thing for feedback early on is that if something just doesn't look right, for example, if you're scrolling up and you see that something is like set to be like true, and you've just done an update and it says here that it's supposed to be true and it's changed to 1, that's probably not right, and it's probably going to cause the game to crash. If you see those kind of things, please let me know. Another big one is int values to float values. So making sure that integer values versus float values, whole numbers versus decimal points, that's a big one. Also will cause a crash. And then one of my favorite ones is that for the string values, I will show you guys for the climbing and for the running. So I've gone through and I've made a custom drop down for this section specifically so that you can go in here and set these values how you want, all the way to the goon, to the different types of biters. So as a reminder, there's 3 different types of biters. There's the regular biters who will now always walk slowly, so you get a mix of them. There's always the fresh dead, they're the runners. So the fresh dead will be able to run and climb. There's a difference between the climbing, so there's the biter, there's the fresh, which the fresh do more climbing than they do leaping and jumping, and then there's the ultimate, which they do more jumping. So, and I've tried to add more of that information in here at the top as well, but just so you know, each difficulty has a blend of these different biters, but you can set these however you want, so it doesn't really matter what's set by the default values. Again, you can always just load the configuration for each difficulty to just see what I roughly have set. The idea is that now with Survivor, you mainly have walkers, so walkers throughout the world. You also have the ability, or you have the fresh dead, which I'm seeing a bug here. Actually, I'm seeing a value that is not correct, so we're going to go ahead and hit save here. So I need to fix that one with the update, but basically the fresh dead will always be running. And then at night for ultimate, so if we go over here to our, go ahead and just push that out. And if we go over here to ultimate, you'll see that the night walkers are runners. So basically during the day, everybody is a walker except a few fresh dead. And then at night, you'll have more enemies that are constantly running. If you want to adjust that for any reason, you don't like that, you can always go here and set these to walkers and hit save, and it will immediately stop those guys from running at night. Same with the goon. If you don't want the goon to constantly be running, you can always set that. Don't worry, there's going to be lots of new AIs coming here in the future. There's going to be lots of different things for the goon, especially that having that one goon that's always behaving the same way won't always be a thing. It'll definitely have a good blend of chaos, but then the loot will also balance that out as well, having a good risk versus reward. Also, there's things like the AI drop, which allows you to go in here and set 1 or 0 for yes or no, true or false, for dropping weapons. And I think in the latest version for Ultimate, I've done a blend of enemies drop weapons instead of all of them dropping weapons. And then Insanity, everybody drops weapons. So as soon as everybody dies, they start dropping their weapons. Most of the time, you don't need to worry about this. Everyone, I am trying to set everything down through the faction controls. Again, most of these things can be found through the guides. Super excited for your guys' feedback. Thank you guys so much for watching another longer video. I'm going to try to tag this one so you guys can jump around. Thank you guys so much for your support. I hope you guys have a blast with this update. Please let me know your thoughts. Hope this helps. Happy gaming, and I'll catch you guys next time.